You know that device in your hand, the screen you're watching right now? It runs on a system of logic, a simple language of true and false. And that system, it's so precise, it literally built the modern world. But the roots of that logic, they don't just trace back to Silicon Valley. No, they go much, much deeper into the very soil of India, thousands of years ago. And the story of how that connection was lost, well, that might be one of the most important stories you've never heard. Now, this isn't some fringe theory. It's a reality that's hardwired into the very structure of Sanskrit, a language with a grammatical engine so perfect, it's now seen as a direct forerunner to modern computer programming. Yeah, you heard that right. It's a huge piece of our history that's been, well, kind of written out of the standard story. And believe me, that's just the tip of the iceberg of what was forgotten. I mean, just think about that for a second. Civilizations always protect what gives them an edge, right? Their best tech, their science, their philosophy. But here we have a system that gave the world the concept of zero, trigonometry that could map the frickin' stars, and surgical techniques that are still mind-blowing today. And yet, it wasn't just lost to time. It feels like it was allowed to fade away, almost by design. Which brings us to our first huge question: why would anyone let a blueprint for the future just disappear? So was it an accident, just the sands of time? Or was it a strategy? Was the greatest intellectual inheritance on the planet simply misplaced? Or was it actively uninstalled? And this is the second, much more unsettling question we have to ask. The idea that those gaps in your knowledge, that feeling that something huge is missing from India's story, it might not be an accident at all. That someone, somewhere, actually made a choice to tear out the most important chapters. And honestly, this is the question that really, truly matters. Because this isn't just about the past. It's about you, right now. It's about the operating system running in your own mind. If the very foundation of your culture's genius was hidden from you, what does that mean for your own potential? What problems could you solve? What incredible things could you build? What could you become if you had access to that original source code? That's what we're going to find out. To really get how deep this loss goes, we don't even have to look back thousands of years. No. We just need to go back to the 1990s and look at something you can find in pretty much any Indian kitchen. This is where that abstract idea of lost knowledge becomes a real modern-day heist. Okay, so get this. In 1995, the United States granted a patent for the discovery that turmeric, haldi, helps heal wounds. A discovery, something every grandmother in India has known for, centuries. This wasn't innovation. This was appropriation, plain and simple. A foreign institution was about to own the rights to and profit from knowledge that literally flows through the veins of Indian culture. They tried to privatize a piece of our collective memory. I mean, can you even imagine the audacity? So what happened? Well, India had to fight back. And how do you think it proved its case? Not with some new lab reports, no. They had to literally dig up ancient Sanskrit texts, old documents, to prove to a modern American court that this new discovery was in fact ancient wisdom. They had to use the past as legal evidence to save the present. And they won. The patent was thrown out. But that victory, it revealed a terrifying weakness. The whole turmeric case was a massive wake-up call. It made everyone ask, look, if they could try to patent something as common as haldi, what else was being taken? What else had we failed to protect? We're talking about things like Wootz steel, the legendary metal in Damascus blades that baffled European scientists for centuries. Or the surgical genius in the Sushruta Samhita, which described things like nose jobs thousands of years ago. Or the Sulba Sutras, which had complex geometric theorems hundreds of years before Pythagoras. This isn't just a list of cool facts. This is a pattern. And here's the point, the really crucial point. The battle over turmeric wasn't the real story. It was just a symptom of a much, much deeper problem. We were fighting over a single leaf, completely unaware that we'd been cut off from the entire forest. We were defending tiny little fragments because we had forgotten that there was a complete, integrated system they all came from. A system so vast, so profound, that everything we've talked about so far, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. Okay, so to really get our heads around what was lost, we have to stop thinking about these as just separate achievements. It wasn't a list of cool inventions. It was a single, interconnected framework, a complete operating system for looking at reality. It's called the Indian Knowledge System, or IKS. And just like any OS, it had a source code, it had its software, and it had applications that could build entire worlds. Now look at this. This visualizes the IKS not as a list, but as a tree. And you can see these main trunks, right? The Dharma traditions, regional knowledge, oral traditions. And from there, everything, and I mean everything, branches out. Science, engineering, art, health, how to run a government. But here's the key. Notice how every single branch, no matter how different it looks, connects all the way back to the same roots. There was no wall between science and philosophy, or between the material and the spiritual. It was all one unified field of knowledge. So what were those roots? The Vedas. Now, we're usually taught to think of the Vedas as just religious hymns or mythology, but in the IKS framework, that's a tiny part of the picture. A much better way to think of them is as the foundational source code. They aren't a book of answers, they're a book of principles. Deep, deep questions about the nature of reality, about consciousness, the structure of the cosmos, the fundamental laws that govern everything. They were the basic code from which everything else was built. And from that source code, the system just built itself up in layers. So first, you have the software. These are the tools for thinking. This is linguistics and logic. The best example is Panini's grammar, a system of 4,000 rules that could generate any possible Sanskrit sentence with the precision of a computer algorithm. It's insane. Then, on top of that, you build the physics engine, math and astronomy. This is where India gave the world the decimal system, the number 0, and advanced trigonometry. This was the engine that lets you calculate and predict the universe. And finally, you build the applications, the hardware. This is where all that logic and math gets applied to the real world, building unbelievable temples, creating rust-proof iron, developing medicine that understood the mind-body connection. You see how it all connects? It's a full stack. And if you need just one single, absolutely stunning example of how advanced this operating system was, just look at calculus. The story we all learn is that calculus was invented by Newton and Leibniz in the late 17th century, right? Well, it turns out that the core ideas, the foundational concepts of infinite series, which are the building blocks of calculus, they were already worked out by the Kerala School of Mathematics in India. And this was between the 14th and 16th centuries. We're talking over 200 years earlier. It's thought these ideas traveled from Kerala to Europe through Jesuit priests. This wasn't just a lucky guess. It was the logical output of a super sophisticated mathematical system. It was a system that was firing on all cylinders. Which brings us back to that one huge unanswered question. What on earth happened to it? A system this powerful doesn't just go away. It doesn't get lost. No. It has to be replaced. It has to be uninstalled. And that uninstallation process was maybe one of the most successful and devastating cultural projects in human history. To get it, we have to look at the exact moment the old world ended and the new one began, the arrival of the British colonial education system. I mean, this quote from Anil Sahasrabudhe, who is chairman of AICTE, says it all. The new system wasn't designed to add to what was already there. It was designed to completely replace it. It created a break, a deep cut in the chain of knowledge that had been passed down for millennia. The Gurukuls, the huge learning centers like Takshashila and Nalanda, that whole ecosystem was just dismantled. And the goal was crystal clear, famously laid out by Thomas Macaulay. It was to create a brand new class of Indians who would be the middlemen. People who were, in his words, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. Now, to do that, you can't just teach people English. You have to convince them that their own systems of knowledge are backward, unscientific, worthless. You have to completely sever their connection to their own intellectual roots. This picture kind of shows that fundamental shift. On one side, you've got the old system, holistic, integrated, where knowledge was a living thing, passed down through a lineage. And on the other, the new system, cut up into little boxes, sterile and focused on memorizing facts, not on deep understanding. Knowledge was ripped out of its cultural context, and just like that, the chain was broken. Suddenly, the source code was written in a language nobody was being taught to read anymore. So here's the most important takeaway from this. The Great Deletion wasn't about burning books. It was about changing minds. It was a psychological operation. The Indian knowledge system wasn't destroyed, it was reframed. It was moved out of the laboratory and put into the museum. It stopped being a living, breathing science that could shape the future, and it became a dead artifact from a primitive past. And once you start to believe your own inheritance is just a relic, you stop looking to it for answers. You start looking everywhere else. So for 100, 200 years, we've basically been running on an operating system installed by somebody else, an OS that taught us to look outward for everything, for validation, for progress, for the next big idea. But what if that was the great mistake? What if the most powerful tools we have are the very ones we were taught to forget? And this is where the story shifts. It stops being about loss and starts being about immense possibility. This flips the whole thing on its head. We started out by asking how ancient India contributed to the modern world. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the right question is, what part of the modern world's fundamental logic doesn't have an Indian root? Think about it. The numbers you use every day, the logic inside your computer, the wellness practices that are transforming modern health, the deep concepts that inspired everyone from Schrödinger to Steve Jobs. The roots are everywhere, even if we've been trained not to see them. You see, the colonial model installed a very simple and very powerful idea in our heads. Progress only flows in one direction, from west to east. Innovation happens over there, and we adopt it over here. They have science, we have spirituality. And this created this deep internal conflict, a feeling of always playing catch-up, of being disconnected from the real engine of global progress. But what if we just change the model? What if we stop seeing the IKS as a museum piece and start seeing it as a powerful dormant engine? Not as a replacement for modern science, but as a second engine running right alongside it. A parallel processing system that gives us a completely different, holistic way to solve the world's most complex problems. Everything from sustainable tech and personalized medicine to a deeper understanding of consciousness itself. Because here's the final realization. The blueprint, that source code, it was never truly destroyed. It's all still there. It's in the texts, in the traditions. It's built into the architecture. It's alive in the philosophies. It wasn't lost. It was just made difficult to read. It was written in a language that we were taught to devalue. But for the first time in centuries, a generation is rising that has all the tools of the modern world and the curiosity to rediscover the old one. The only question left is, after all this time, are we finally ready to read it?